Hi, this is Jahnavi and I'm here at Purple Valley in Goa. And we just kick-started the season with a very exciting retreat with Adam Keane and Edwin Bryant. And today I'm in conversation with Adam and we're going to be speaking about the Yoga Sutras. So we want to bring in like some fresh energy into the YouTube channel and try to make yoga philosophy a bit more accessible. And the idea is really to set up a context of some of the texts for you to then go and build like a strong practice of your own swadhyaya. And so this conversation is going to really be valuable to you if you're looking for an entry point into the Yoga Sutras. And maybe you've already studied the Yoga Sutras, but you're looking for an alternate perspective, or you want to just go deeper into some aspects of it or understand the background. So stay tuned. And thank you, Adam, for speaking to me today.
Lovely to be here.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So to start off, I think I just want to understand your personal journey with the Yoga Sutras, how it began, and what is the value you've derived from them.
Well, I started, like many people, I think, chanting them.
Right.
That was a very popular thing to do. I think there was someone doing it in Mysore. I maybe did it in Mysore. We know that Krishnamacharya encouraged chanting of it. So, it was a kind of thing that a lot of us did, to memorize them and chant them over. So I started doing that, but I didn't really feel they were kind of adding to my life that much. I mean, on the plus side, they do give a context. So you get some ideas about what yoga might be more than asana, and how it kind of tessellates or fits in together. But I'm not sure that they really gave me what I was looking for in just chanting them in terms of kind of an approach to everyday life, really, which is what I was looking for, we're on, as you mentioned, we're on retreat with Edwin Bryant, and he often said, Yoga Sutras before dawn, Bhagavad Gita, daily life, which I'd probably come down on that side. I think it's a great little soundbite. I find value in it, but I think that we probably, to open up this discussion, I think, we can use it as bullet points to cite Edwin, to bullet points for discussion, but I think they need to be expanded on a lot. And I don't think that chanting it is really, although valuable for concentration and discipline, I don't think that will get one, or it didn't me, where one wants to be in terms of handling emotions. They don't really talk about handling emotions and conflict and, daily life, really, They're very idealistic.
So then what is the benefit that you're deriving from it? Like if maybe you start with an asana practice, as most of us do, and then we go into pranayama meditation. And then you look at the text just to be like, okay, what was this thing that is yoga? Yeah,
there's some great practical explainers, like, practice in the consistent attempt to return back to the self, right? Practice, the way to still the mind is practice and letting go, vairagya. You need to practice for, a long time, consistently and with a good attitude. There's lots of great little sound bites that are there, If you're not with the self, then you're away from the self in the whirling mind, in the worrying mind, right? Or you're with the self, hence the chitta vritti nirodha. But I think ultimately, despite the great sound bites, I feel that the chitta vritti nirodha in the first place, that for me is problematic, because in the Yoga Sutras it definitely says that the mind is to be stopped, not just calmed down, because we all think, mind is a problem. Indeed, it is a problem. The answer is to stop it. But the question is, do we really want to stop the mind? Is that really appropriate for daily life? Or do we want to kind of use it and feel better about it, right? And I don't feel that at a certain point we can expand further. Or maybe the Yoga Sutras maybe is an end game, and in the middle, we use other texts and other ways to kind of get to the end point, which might be almost the end of life, really, stilling the mind and making peace with ourselves, etc. Because it really, it is phrased like that,
So there's a couple of things I want to ask you about that. But before, maybe we just set up a context of the Yoga Sutras, just for anyone to just understand this conversation a bit better. So where did they figure in the larger tradition? Why were they kind of revived in a sense, and why do they feature so prominently today?
Great question. So the Yoga Sutras are part of the classical period. So they're, roughly in the kind of 400, 500 year mark of the Bhagavad Gita, and many of the important yoga texts really are written in that area, Upanishads, etc. It's a very fertile creative period of time. I think, the mix of dates, I think it's 200 CE and slightly before that, but around that time, So a long time ago, first of all, and then they kind of fester in obscurity for a long time, really, until Vivekananda is really the guy who plucks them out of relative obscurity, comes to the West with yoga, and kind of reinvents the yoga sutras in a way that allows for his message to be put out, which is meditation and certain kind of rather psychological approach that we use today, really, to yoga practice. They are very psychological in nature. So. Yeah, I think it's important to know that one, the text isn't the only yoga text. It's actually quite an obscure yoga text for traditional Indian Brahmins, or in the established pantheon of yoga text is quite obscure. People would suggest that Krishnamacharya used it to authenticate the asana practice he was doing, because there's a few sutras on asana, where it's contextualized within a broader frame as well. It's not tantric. It's not it's not something which is kind of obscure or weird. It's still using asana in the way that he liked it, but within the context of meditation and stilling the mind. And so the perspective is, let's say, it doesn't ruffle any feathers. It's very rational, right, in the way it's set out. So it was very well taken up by a Western public because it is rational, right? And it's sanitized, right? It doesn't mention any weird practices or any different forms of God. So it's very easy for Westerners to take it on as well, So a cynic might say that, that's one of the reasons that it's rooted in a kind of colonial-esque dialogue, I think, as well. I think, I know that won't necessarily be a popular point of view, but, the reason why it's so popular is because it's a kind of cleaned up and sanitized package, or here's yoga, and it's convenient but not really the whole truth. And other aspects of it are that people suggest that it was used by the British to pacify a local Indian population at the time when there's a lot of conflict. Oh, here's a book. It says passivity. It says ahimsa is the tenet. So here's your own book. Don't fight us. So there's different reasons why it obtained a prominence, and maybe not all of them balanced or relevant even, political. Everything's political in the end.
Sure. I can understand, of course, like how it's so systematic, and that's why it will appeal to a Western rational mind. But then there's also like a lot of like very outright claims about Ishwar.
True.
And even the fact that there is like a state that exists beyond our normal state of consciousness, which might be hard to digest. So
I think it is, but the thing is with the Yoga Sutras, the other reason, again, cynically, is that it's very ambiguous, right? You need the commentary to unpack it. But when people, and which the whole thing, obviously the Yoga Shastras of Patanjali with the commentary, but people don't talk about Yoga Shastra, they talk about Yoga Sutra. If you don't read it with the commentary, you can kind of make anything out of it. Yeah, I mean, you're right, it's absolutely radical and extreme. But do people take it like that? Probably not. I mean, it says, when it talks of the yamas, it's talking about monastic vows, one of them being non-possessiveness of possessions and the other celibacy. But there's ways around because it's so ambiguous. The other thing is, it is so ambiguous, and that's one reason why people like Vivekananda took it and used it, because you can kind of hang a lot of things on it, whereas a text, 18 chapters like the Bhagavad Gita, where it's going on and on, there's no two ways about it. It says it all in the text. But for this one, it's like, well, you can make, no, celibacy is not celibacy anymore. It's just as long as you have sex with one person at a time, that's all right. That's how we're taking it nowadays, you see? So again, it's like, well, yes, it's extreme, but do people actually take it like that? Probably the reading is how we're able to have a lot of leeway to read it as we want, let's say, because to unpack it, you need the commentaries, and not many people, including me, have fully read those commentaries, So you read it on face value, you miss a lot, and you can kind of use your own creativity around reading it a great deal, which is another reason I think it's so popular, because a teacher can then come and say, well, Yoga Sutras, and then make it their own, It's great in a way, but it allows for a lot of different interpretations.
I would think though then it matters more to like contextualize the Yoga Sutras, as Edwin has been doing for us, like in the lecture. So then you can't just do whatever you want with them and interpret anyway, but then you have to go back to the tradition in some way. So maybe for someone who wants to kind of address them sincerely, like rooted in the tradition, like maybe what would the pathway be? What other texts maybe they can refer to, or resources?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the main thing to recognize, the Yoga Sutra is a monastic text, right? It was written, I mean, my understanding of Atta Yoga Nusasanam, the first sutra is, now starts yoga, means, one, it means continuation. Now we're coming back to that subject, you know, because Patanjali synthesizes a lot of stuff that's gone before. But the other thing I believe he's saying is, now, when you've decided to renounce life and action in life and basically go to the forest or monastery, now starts your yoga training. And it's very much like that. It's like, you know, ahimsa, you know, is only possible if you renounce life. Otherwise, like a Jain, you'd be sweeping in front of you, and, you know, you cannot not harm in action, in active daily life. So really the text is a monastic text, and to make sense of it, you know, which is a text completely for non-action, for the sake of, you know, you're in the monastery, you know, you're not acting anymore, you're simply focusing on your meditational practice, which is, you know, it has a relevance there because it does some psychological guidelines and, you know, gives you some context. And, you know, you've got the Buddhist flavor with, you know, if you're feeling, you know, if you're feeling envy or if you're feeling kindness, right, you know, you counter those states with counter states. And, you know, there's, you know, there is stuff to, I don't want to be too down, there is stuff to pull out of it, but it needs unpacking, you know, and to do that, I would suggest, the easiest way is just go to the Bhagavad Gita, which is yoga in action, as opposed to yoga in non-action. So and then here we have bullet points that are really good schemata or context, and then Bhagavad Gita kind of unpacks it and said, well, you know, well, how do you do ahimsa in daily life? Well, you can't. I mean, you know, if you read the Yoga Sutras in context with the Bhagavad Gita, how does it open? It opens with the civil war, you know, and Krishna telling the guy, you've got to fight in this war, and in fact, you know, make sure you kill, and, you know, and do your job well. You know, not only fight in it, but, you know, get stuck in. You know, so how do you square that with the Yoga Sutras, which is saying, you know, the fundamental tenet is ahimsa. You know, because it comes first in the list. So when something that comes first in the list of the yamas, for example, ahimsa, satya, asteya, ahimsa is the fundamental one. Then it's qualified by the preceding ones. It's not that the five are equal. The first, then, you know, so ahimsa is the fundamental tenet. Yeah. And then it's qualified by the rest. Now, how do you make sense of ahimsa in daily life without just simply degenerating into trying to eat a vegetarian diet and not killing the mosquitoes when you're on your Goa yoga teacher training? You know, how do you make more sense of this text, right? And there you've got the Bhagavad Gita saying, you know, that sometimes violence is non-violence. You know, I mean, what Arjuna comes to recognize later on is that, you know, the obvious thing that maybe the reader recognizes is if he doesn't get involved in the civil war, he's going to leave all his family to get killed by they're not going to change their minds, you know. So the bigger violence is actually potentially not participating in it, or whatever he does, he's damned, as we say, you know. If he does, he acts, he's damned. If he doesn't, he's damned. And, you know, and what we need to recognize in modern life is that technology and middlemen are taking away and covering over all the implications of our actions, you know. So it's a pleasant fiction, I would say, to think that one can live in ahimsa in the way that Patanjali is suggesting it in modern life, in the world. You know? I think one enters into magical or hopeful thinking, let's say. You know, in actual life, even turning, you know, walking down the road or turning on a light switch, you're entering into your pleasure, somewhat. You know, your comfort is on the back of someone else's pain, and that's just the way it is. So the Bhagavad Gita attempts to resolve that. You know, that ultimately, as long as you have desires in the world, and, you know, you go after them, you're implicating someone else. Suffering may be a heavy word, but, you know, sometimes suffering and sometimes just, you know, causing them difficulty, right? Our pleasures are structured on the back of other people's pain. Now what do we do in terms of living an honourable life? And then you've got the Dharma, you know, living in accordance with Dharma. So, yeah, I think, you know, it's good to use because you've got a framework, you know, and you can check back in, you know, but the points need to be expanded. Otherwise, it's easy to take them in a slightly face value way where they don't end up really informing your life, you know.
Right. So you're saying that the Gita can help extract more practical value from the sutras.
Yeah. I mean, you know, and you know, the sutras talks about the stuff. I mean, tapasvadhyaya, you know, you've got to do something with efforts. You've got to have a little bit of reflection, and you know, you've got to find a purpose, you know, higher, you know, purpose than just yourself in life. You know, that all makes sense. But then it's like you just need fleshing out a bit, you know. And what does tapas look like? You know, like, and then, you know, you've got the Bhagavad Gita that says, you know, like don't try too hard, you know, and cause yourself suffering in asana, right? Otherwise, you're torturing me in the body. Krishna will say in chapter 18, you know. But nevertheless, you know, if you don't do something, you're compared to a ship on the water in a storm, you know, in your mind, you know. So it kind of fleshes it out a lot, and then you can kind of got these metaphors and these ideas to then use those little bullet points in a more effective way. So I suppose, what I'd say is, use the Yoga Sutras, but then inform it with other things as well,
So I'm curious, so Krishnamacharya obviously probably believed that there was a practical value of the sutras for a modern day practitioner. And then you already said, like for him, maybe it was a way to authenticate his asana practice or teachings. But do you think that was something more for him with
the sutras? I know that was as he got older, it was increasingly important to him, and he's an inspiring guy. I mean, he allowed everyone to chant them, men and women, and Westerners making a mess of the pronunciation. He encouraged everyone to do that. I know that. I can only guess that he was using it originally, perhaps as a precedent, but then he used it in later life as well. So that doesn't necessarily hang true, because he emphasized it as he went on, and he was not teaching Ashtanga, as we know, Ashtanga Yoga, the method of asana, after 1940, early 40s, left the Mysore Palace, and then he doesn't do that again. So, yeah, I don't know, is the honest answer. I don't know why he picked it so, and used it to such an end, to such a degree, but I think that, him and Vivekananda have really emphasized a text which needs to be qualified, I think, by a modern reader and practitioner, along with other texts, and a little bit more balanced, let's say. I mean, where does the role of asana come from, really? I mean, in the Yoga Sutras, you've got this idea of sthiram, sukham, asanam, yoga is a steady, comfortable position. Everyone knows that one, and it really is for the sake of, people will say it's for the sake of meditation, it's for the sake of a seat of meditation. Seems to make sense, really, stabilize the mind, and you'll find a similar thing in the Bhagavad Gita as well, in fact. They're using asana for the sake of asana in the Bhagavad Gita, again, it unpacks it a little bit. If you want to use asana like that, that's a possibility. In the Bhagavad Gita, they're talking about using it as a kind of dry run, or a kind of, dress rehearsal for controlling your mind and your emotions and your desires, for when you go out and you do the main yoga in the Bhagavad Gita is karma yoga, right? And you go out in the daily life, you've got to be self-controlled, and you've got to be aware of your, yourself and your desires, and, easier to do that when you're on your own on a retreat or something with your body, than do it in the world when there's loads of stuff going on. So, I have a kind of a little bit more unpacking of asana there than maybe is done in the Yoga Sutras, But I mean, I've got to get this in, because I know, I don't want it to break off before this point, that, you have this other thing where, the Gita is very vested in, which is, it also says in the sutras, karma, the problem of karma, you've got stuff stored in the body, and how do you get that out, And the Gita will use action in life to go through those emotions and those responsibilities. And then later you've got a whole bunch of texts that I might say we might emphasize a little bit more, tantric texts, like people like Christopher Wallace, who I recently interviewed on my podcast, will talk about. I don't know so much about the tantric text, but I understand a reappraisal of the body, that there's something valuable in the body as a source of experience, right? And the problem, one of the problematic aspects of the Yoga Sutras and this mentality, which is also found in the Bhagavad Gita, by the way, for using asana as a sense to stabilize the body, but also to kind of repress the body, and repress the body as a source of experience and knowledge, and for absolute preeminence of the mind. And again, another reason why yoga asana might be so appealing to a modern scientific perspective, that the body is an obstacle to be got rid of. But then you have this problem with karma. What do you do with the stuff stored in the body? Where in the Bhagavad Gita, really use asana for stability, then go out in the world and cleanse your karma by action, by dharma. Cleansing all this different stored emotions in your body. But then, in the Yoga Sutras, that might be there, but it's not really unpacked. And then I suggest in the tantric text, you've got this idea of actually doing that karma cleansing in the asanas themselves, so they do something themselves to the body, which I think is a new innovation from classical yoga, which is asana for stability. And then latterly in the 8th to 12th century, you've got the body used as a valid source of knowledge, cleansing those karmas that are in the body so the mind sees clearly. And I think that if we're doing an embodied practice and not just sitting and doing a few asanas, as was often taught previously, if we're doing an embodied practice, then we need to recognize that we're doing something valuing the body, using the body. Completely confused now.
No, I would, maybe we can explore that a little more, because obviously that's more appealing for us as like doing 6 days a week of an asana practice to think about a way to access something through the body rather than suppressing it. And I think all of us have the experience of like the transformation happening with the body rather than a transcendence of the body. So I think, I don't know, what is a useful entryway then into the tantric tradition? Or
I mean, I think the body positivism of Tantra needs to be incorporated with, and I don't think it's necessarily mutually exclusive, that you need that stability that the Yoga Sutras talk about, how to regulate your mind, how to deal with negative mind states, how to stabilize really, and how to control your desires, I mean, the thing with Tantra is that it's not suppressing the desires as was previously in the classical period when we talk about Bhagavad Gita or Yoga Sutras. They're talking about suppressing desires. The desire is a problem and you suppress it. Whereas I think for a modern practitioner, it's more helpful to work with desires because we don't necessarily want to suppress desires completely. I think the modern, we just evolved, or the modern framework is more amenable to that perspective, I think, that the emotions are not necessarily a problem, that to feel a pure emotion, whether it be sadness or rage even, or they're beautiful, and pure sadness is a beautiful, so why would you want to suppress that? We're living in the world, Patanjali he's looking out there to transcendence again, maybe in 1800s, 1900s, Western tradition when they just hope for a better life and heaven afterwards, that might be relevant, but we're much more in the world these days and our aspirations are in the world. So I think we also need to kind of try and bring in some other information so we can value emotions, It's not that emotions are the problem, it's that not controlling the emotions is the problem, so we become confused and then become tormented by the emotions. But rather than reject them altogether, I think we can use them, and I think the asana allows us to kind of get a better handle or clarity on the emotions, perhaps, rather than just suppressing. I mean, I think I used it to suppress for many years. It's easy and it works, You just, do the asana and you restrain your mind and you restrain your body and you discipline yourself very much. So you're getting in, if you're anything like me, you're getting in from a wayward kind of past where you're doing all things and completely undisciplined, and then suddenly you found a way to discipline yourself, and it feels great, for a while. And then you start to think, well, actually, I'm still in the world, and I kind of want to enjoy it as well, right? I mean, maybe there might be something more, but I don't want to put all my eggs in that basket. Just, we don't know, So, this is a way to also incorporate this teaching to live in the world and enjoy the world as well, And
yeah, it's an interesting perspective and I think appeals to most of us. But I also want to talk about like the mindset with which you would approach the Yoga Sutras, and also that you've brought in the Gita, because I think especially for most people in the West, the rhetoric is very alien. Some of the claims, as we've seen, people are like, why should I just take that at face value? This is the basic premise.
Yeah.
What would you say is a helpful mindset to cultivate when approaching the text that just helps the practitioner derive most value from it?
Yeah. Well, going to be contrary with you here, but I say, you have to bring in other texts to contextualize the Yoga Sutras, I think. That's the thing. So if you're just using sutras, it becomes so alien that then you end up kind of feeling like you can kind of almost do what you want, and then it's like, well, I'm still living in ahimsa and satya and asteya, and then you start to kind of translate the niyam, of saucha as cleanliness. I mean, that's just a ridiculous claim that, you need to keep your house clean, and that's saucha. I mean, saucha is cleansing the mind, cleansing the karma in the body, But so you need to unpack it, You need to unpack it so it makes any sense. You're just not trying to keep your bedroom clean all the time. You think that's the end of the job. It's not, Tapas, the burn, like basically stability of emotions and desires allows you to kind of mentally and emotionally clean out yourself. Because there's stuff inside, I mean, because otherwise we just need to read a book and we'd experience it, the truth. So if we all read the same book and we don't all experience the truth of that we're all one or that there is a God, or, why is that? And it's because there's stuff inside that's blocking, So, and then we could call that trauma. Now, I like to call it trauma. It's a more modern term, or we could call that karma, But stuff in the body needs to be gotten out. And I think that the Yoga Sutras doesn't really, it's more a suppressive text, it doesn't allow for that unpacking of that capacity, I mean, it mentions it, klesha, karma, the problem is the cleansing of the karmas, and then the mind is clear and it shines brightly and it sees everything as it is. But it doesn't really say much about how to do that, And the Gita will say, well, this is your problem, like you're in the civil war, you can't really win. Whatever you do, you're causing himsa, you're causing suffering to people. So what do you do now, And then it starts to show, how really, it's not to say you can't enjoy things and have emotions, but desiring is the problem. Grasping and trying to exploit the world is the problem, And then it unpacks that. So what does that look like in reality? Like, what does a desire look like in reality, as opposed to, a wish for everyone to, a wish for, a more kind of, let's say, expansive wish for, general well-being of people, or, kindness, or, how does a desire, how do we differentiate a personal desire from, something which is still emotional and still a wish, but not, a desire, So it's subtle, And I just kind of feel, other texts, not just the Gita, I mean, I like to use modern literature a lot because I think that most people are grounded in their own tradition, whatever that be, and it may not be the Vedic tradition. So use the modern literature, I use poetry a lot. I love T.S. Eliot's poetry. There's a whole, many books that can speak to you, and then you can kind of contextualize that within the framework of the sutras and the unpacking of the Gita, and you're good to go.
Yeah. I think maybe I also want to talk a bit about, if we were to ground the Ashtanga practice elsewhere, like particularly in the Tantric tradition, like how would you go about doing that?
Well, I don't want to make too many claims about my understanding of Tantra because I've not got, loads of a personal practice in Tantra or loads of information. I would refer to people like Christopher Wallace, who's doing a good job. He's written a book on Tantra. I think it's great. I think the one thing to recognize is that Tantra is a body positive practice where Tantra means to weave, right? So weave or a loom or an expansive instrument also, So it's using desires rather than suppressing desires. And almost that's almost enough to hear that, Look at desires, look at emotions, and don't just suppress them, but see if you can see them clearly for what they are. Because I think the problem with what we call negative emotions or that lead to desires are that they're slightly confused in a way. They're not seeing things clearly as they are, right? So when you can see things more clearly as they are and you can look at desires, again using the Yoga Sutras, Drigdarshana, the problem is the seer and the seen. The problem is that the looker and what's being looked at have gotten too attached. So creating that little bit of space, having the ability to create a little bit of space between your emotions and your desires and then being able to look at them more, I don't think we don't need to make this super complicated, really. Tantric practices, obviously, they're more esoteric. They use mantra, they use the body. You need to be initiated generally into them. So I'm not going to go recommending particular tantric practices. The person's willing to, to look at that whole realm of text that's there, But that's not my practice and the way I do it. But I think with a few pointers, I don't believe we're far off, necessarily, that we can do a lot of it ourselves. And people will disagree and say you have to have the guru, you have to have the teacher. But, I think that, we have more ability than we think we do often. That's generally the way I like to encourage my teachings. You have a lot of it's all inside. We know it all inside. Maybe it helps to have a few pointers along the way, but maybe we don't need so much, someone there by our side all the time telling us what to think, The beauty of these texts is you keep looking at them and trying to understand them and make them on your own, Just hearing them, or like I said at the start of the chat, just chanting them. It's like, you may as well be singing a lullaby or almost anything in a way, Maybe they give discipline or concentration. A very basic understanding of the tantric worldview is the body is like a kind of microcosm of the universe, right? So the nadis and the chakras and the kundalini, they represent, the kind of relationship with the universe out there as well. And so you use the inner universe to understand the outer universe, right? So microcosm, macrocosm kind of thing. So what I'm suggesting in the asana is that, the spine, and you always say you do see the kind of subtle symbols and metaphors in other texts, that this churning of the ocean. It could be the mind, or it could be the use of the spine as a rod. Yeah, all the impressions, all the emotions, it's all stored around the nerves of the spine, right? I mean, probably in other tissues as well, but I think a lot of the experiences and a lot of our emotions, they're probably stored around the nerves of the spine. This is a supposition, really. You're moving the spine, or just moving the body anyway. It's cathartic, dance or anything. But with yoga, what you're doing is you're creating an inner pressure, first of all, as you use the asana. If you do it skillfully, you're not just stretching out of your body, but you're pulling together. Once you create an inner pressure on the spine, and then you're in more or less every asana, you're turning it. You're twisting and turning the spine in opposite directions. There's a lot of engagement in spinal movement, which you don't get in, say, other movements, football or dance, or maybe a little bit dance, but no. Anyways, so you're doing this, and then through that physical practice, you're able then to bring up emotions, impressions, and stuff that are lodged in the spine like sediments. Really, you imagine that sediment collects through the spine, and you just kind of locking or kind of stimulating that sediment to come up to the consciousness again where it can be seen, and then digested. I mean, Tantra uses a lot of metaphors in Tantra about digestion, how to digest. And it's talking about digesting experience, really, because karma is undigested past experiences. It's trauma. So we can use this, the trauma therapy in yoga, although slightly reductionist, and there's some problems about the modern use of the word. It's very pertinent, and I think it can be used, and that's why I think so many people have some semblance of attraction to it, because there's something when you move the body and you do breathing, which is quite, controlled and methodical, and then you're using the bandhas and you're using compressive kind of stretching. You have to stretch in the right way as well. You do all that, and it stirs things up. And I think one of the really unfortunate kind of misnomers about yoga is you're doing yoga, that people say, and probably said it to you as well, you must be really calm. And it's not the case at all. I mean, yoga is aiming for something out there, but in the immediate experience of a practitioner, I don't think that's necessarily meant to be the case at all. That it's meant to churn the waters, and so there's some kind of reconciliation, let's say, some kind of resolution to a lot of loose ends in our past experiences. I mean, that's my understanding of the practice and how I felt it myself. I can't vouch for that experience any more than to say that I felt that was a process that I went through myself. And that's also why the practice needs to be contextualized in a firm grounding, because, my suggestion is that you had the Ayurveda and yoga always go together, because yoga in tantric terms is not really about stability at all. It's actually about instability. It's about dislodging things to recreate a more holistic balance, because we all find balance in a kind of imbalanced way. We all find some kind of balance in order to function. How do you get to greater balance? You have to come into more unbalance in a way by taking in the ways that kind of worked and kind of didn't, that you try to find some balance. And so for a while, you're more off center, and through your journey with asana practice, you're more off center. And that's why you also have to kind of ground it in, other disciplines, maybe some sitting in the morning, maybe look at your diet, look at your lifestyle, use other therapies, go and get other therapies. I think that's necessary. Talk a bit, get acupuncture, get massage, do more stuff, It's not enough just chanting the Yoga Sutras and doing, it needs more context around it, because it is an intense thing, and I think that's why people are attracted to it. And I don't think just reading it through the lens of the Yoga Sutras fully unpacks what the asana is or what it does,
Yeah, I think I agree. Asana can obviously bring up a lot of things, but may not be sufficient to help us digest, like you said. And maybe the digestion happens in the sitting or the pranayama, or maybe.
Well, the digestion happens in just seeing it. Once you come into that emotion and you're not in the actual state of that emotion, the trigger point in the first place, and you can see it in the light of day. And once you can see the emotion, it's gone, almost like that, where it's not attached any longer to its original stimulus. But nevertheless, I think there's a lot that needs to support the asana practice. Otherwise, certainly my experience in Mysore was it wouldn't necessarily say that it was making people more peaceful or more balanced. Quite the opposite, in fact. And I see that also with students I've taught, that you need to contextualize this. However you do that, to ground it in daily life and make it work for daily life. And I've seen people cling on to it in a way that's just not working anymore, because it's kind of, somehow it's also attractive to kind of have this kind of, we always kind of want a rigid framework around our life, and then you end up being trapped by that kind of, Patanjali, and just suppress and suppress and suppress. And well, I speak from experience because that's how it was for me for many years, and it's functional as well. For if you can't digest and you can't allow things to be seen, then just something which just puts a cap on it for a while is good, But at a certain point, I think we need to turn the tables and use it more thoroughly, Yeah.
Yeah. So, before we bring this to a close, I think the point of this conversation, and a few that I want to have in the future with other teachers, is like helping the person get to a point where they have an established swadhyaya. Because, you ultimately want to reach a place where you have an unmediated understanding or a study of the text and the tradition and your own practice. What is the way to really establish that strongly?
Well, self-study, sadhyaya.
Yeah.
I suppose it's ultimately it's building a yoga lifestyle around, so that gives you the capacity to look more clearly. If you have some, and then again, it's subtle because an over-discipline just allows no capacity to reflect. But if you've got no discipline, then you're all over the place. So, it's really this narrow path that, Krishna in the Gita keeps suggesting to Arjuna. It's not too much. He says, a yogi doesn't sleep too much, a yogi doesn't sleep too little, right? Doesn't eat too much, doesn't eat too little. It's very a narrow path, But when you get it right, you're able to reflect in daily life. And I don't even believe that you need necessarily to do a formal sitting contemplation. Just the thoughts that come to you when people are, talking to you, when you're in the heat of the moment, when you're having, if you're able to have a little bit of space between that thought and yourself, you start to unpack the whole thing. And once you pull at a string, it all comes out, and it does, and it's possible. And I did it without any formal meditation whatsoever. I see as much investiture in the scriptures, in the traditional scriptures, in simply contemplation, in daily life, as sitting in a quiet place and doing something in a formal sense. You look at all the Upanishads; they're also really building just a general looking at what's going on and being interested in what's going on. I think in a postmodern society, we really think we're kind of like too modern to ask basic questions like, well, how did I get here and what do I want, and what's the meaning of life? And these are the questions, and they've always been the questions, and it's no different to the Socratic method in the 2,000 years ago in the Western tradition. The same questions are being asked in the East. They're just phrased slightly differently. And well, first of all, they use the body, and second of all, they don't believe that we objectively have pure reason when we look out. The difference between Western and Eastern is really that the mind doesn't see clearly prima facie immediately, right? Whereas the West will say, you can just look outside and you have pure reason. The East will say, well, no, you don't have pure reason until you remove these obstacles of seeing, these karmas that obstruct your way of seeing, that the mind can't be trusted. It's the very tenet of the Bhagavad Gita in the first place, when Arjuna thinks he has 20/20, but he's in the middle of a battle. How can he? It's just like us, think, we know what to do, make these clever arguments about how to, and we're kind of stimulated on the inside by karmas we can't even see, by emotions we can't even see, and on the outside we're overstimulated all the time. And yet we think we can use our reason, So the wisdom of this is to use a method, to live a lifestyle, a whole lifestyle that's not rational, it's not really rational, but within that context, then the mind sees more clearly, Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you for having this conversation. I think there's so many valuable insights for us to digest now. And
I hope so.
Thank you, Adam.
And thanks for inviting me.
Yeah.
And it's been great. I really
Here's
appreciate
to more
it.
conversations like this.
Cheers.